celebrating 21 years of Loaded Boards, discussing the ins and outs of the brand on this all-original podcast series. My name is Ari Chamasmany, and I'm very humbled and honored to be joined by Don Tashman and Pablo Castro, where we are discussing the origin story of the brand and how the whole thing got started. From the beginning, Donnie, when did Loaded Boards come to be? Where did the idea come from? How did it start?
And how?
Yeah.
Why? What were you thinking? Well, the launch of Loaded Boards was in June of 2002, which we're here to celebrate 21 years anniversary of that, of the Vanguard, that is, and of Loaded Boards. But the origin predates it by quite a bit. I'd say one of the most important, early drivers was when I was going to college in New York City. Was to get around New York City at that time. I was riding a little street skate with 45 millimeter wheels, getting caught in every little crack.
Yeah.
And found a set of Crypto Classics. Found this old Vision board. It was like a 36-inch Vision board. Was riding that, and bumped into this guy Josh, who's now one of my closest friends. We met on a bus, and it was a Crocodile Dundee moment where he's like, "That's not a skateboard. This is a skateboard," and pulls out this 5-foot plank of wood. It was like a red and white tops board. I've never seen one since, or aside from that one. But he had Indy 215s on that, and a set of. But we ended up building them up, and I spent most of the next 7 years, playing around, making creative boards to get around New York City. Every night we lived at the top of a hill, and there was this long hill down Claremont Avenue, about half a mile long, that we'd skate down and then take cabs back up for $1. So that was like our nightly skate session. And it was also the best way to get around New York City. And so I did that for a bunch of years. And, that was my impetus to go to school as well, because school was at the top of the hill, and then I get to skate back afterwards. And, traveled for a bit, ended up back in New York City, was still skating, went to one of my local shops. I think it was NYPD or PSNY. I was on 4th and West 4th, which doesn't make sense, but it does in Greenwich Village. And Brian, who later started Earthwing, was working there behind the counter. And he introduced me to Randall trucks,
That was like your first taste of reverse kingpin?
Yeah. That was the first time I'd ever seen that.
Yeah.
This is probably 97, 98. And it was the first time I'd seen. Yeah, but before that, I'd been riding Indy 215s.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. So you'd only been riding Indies up until that point? Only been exposed to Indies, kind of this.
I had these, I think they were called Baku. They later became Revenge trucks. Mm-hmm. And they were like these twisting trucks with the bushing on the side, the torsion truck.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
But the ones I got had like little nubs that would go into either side, so that when they twist back. Yeah. And I think the first day I got them, they just split. Mm-hmm. So the bushing didn't really do anything. So it was like this ankle workout. And that taught me a lot. But that was, I guess, the first experience of reverse kingpin. Yeah. Then riding those Randalls changed the whole game. And then
what was for you, I guess, what was the difference that you felt between say a Randall setup and that torsion setup? What was the significant kind of, oh man, I
said between the Randall
and the stability aspect of it?
Yeah, or the precision. The Randall and the 215s really, which was mainly what I've been riding, and also other wide Indy and street style trucks. You'd be able to get a lot more turn in it, and it was also just
felt planted.
Yeah,
Randall 215s or Randall 180s?
Indy 215s versus the Randalls. Yeah,
180s
versus the Randall 180s. Yeah, 180s and 150s. But I don't remember which one I started on.
Yeah,
Randalls I think I started 150s. But
Randalls are my starters as well.
Yeah, those. And then Brian also introduced me, I believe, to Fiberflex, which had done a reissue during that period. So that was the first experience with composites. Although I'd been taking old snowboards, was really passionate about snowboarding and was taking old snowboards and chopping them up and making them into skateboards.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that as well.
That was, that feeling of flex and that feeling of that floated, like just trying to emulate snowboarding. And at that time, like, street skating was going through kind of a little bit of a dip. I mean, it had gone through a big dip in the 90s, was coming back in some ways, but there was nobody doing, that I knew of, there was nobody doing like snowboard style, surf style skateboards.
Yeah.
Gravity and Sector 9 were doing that here, back on the West Coast, but I was not aware of them. Fiberflex was doing a little bit, had been doing it all along, but I wasn't aware of that, and it was me and like Josh, and there was one other kid on campus that I knew that had a longboard. Otherwise, at that point in the 90s, I didn't know anyone who's riding anything.
And you were just building these things for anybody who'd see you on one or
yeah, I built for friends, but yeah, mainly for myself. But yeah, I built for a couple friends, mainly here back in LA.
So you were coming back to LA and you'd bring your board with you and people would see that and they'd be like, oh man, I need one of those or something. And you'd be like, yeah, I could cut you one of those. No problem. I see.
We'd go and I'd have me and a couple buddies would go up to Beverly Hills to the Maple Drive, and it's it's like a mile long, super smooth downhill, and we'd go skate that, and people would come by and be like, "Oh, that's cool. Where can I get one of those?" Or here's my number. I'll cut you one. And it was kind of like that.
And that was when that was when you were cutting things in your living room.
I was cutting them in Josh's backyard because we're both from here, and in my parents' backyard. That was in my dorm room.
That was in college.
I was in college, but I was not. I
cutting
wasn't
them
pressing
in your
anything.
dorm room.
Cutting in my dorm room. Yeah, my roommate loved that. Totally loved that.
You then go and had a piece of like a snowboard with a jigsaw in your dorm room.
Exactly.
Oh, man.
Yep.
Okay.
That's exactly what it looked like.
Perfect roommate.
Yes, exactly. I made up for it, I think, in other ways. So, we had a good time.
So I guess then when did like the name Loaded, the whole kind of, when did it go from DIY to something that was like, hey, maybe this has some legs to be a business?
So there's a bunch of steps in between. One is that not only was I using it in New York, but I was traveling after college. I traveled around the world, and I would take my skateboard with me everywhere I went, to Europe, to Asia, and all over the U.S.
Yeah.
I'd bring a skateboard everywhere I went. It was such an amazing way to explore different cities and have these different experiences. And
did you find like when you were overseas, did you get like a lot of people that would just stare at you, kind of cruise by on one of these things? Did you feel like it? Because I know even now there's kind of like an air of like, oh, what's that? You see somebody on a skateboard in Europe, or like when people see somebody on a skateboard in Europe, especially a longboard, it's like, that's odd, or this looks weird, I don't know.
Yeah, I'd had a hand-cut board in '98 in Japan.
Yeah, right.
And I was like, I remember being on the subway and like nobody would stare at me. They're all respectful, and then I turn quickly and everyone's looking at me. That's true.
When you have a skateboard.
In Rome, I remember skating around in '97, and like, there I felt like the drivers and the mopeds would like see you on a skateboard and they'd be like, oh cool, a target. And like, that was terrifying.
Aim for you.
Yeah, at one point I was skating in Rome and all of a sudden I was going like 30 miles an hour and I was like, what happened? And this truck had driven by me with a nail sticking out the side that caught on my shirt and just like launched me forward, and I had to like extricate myself from it and like speed wobble it out, and yeah, it was pretty terrifying.
But like through all these travels, you essentially learned that this is become an essential piece of gear for you.
It was where I put most of my time and energy and passion in, but I never thought about it as a business.
No, right.
In '99, I ended up back in New York and working for a .com. It's a long story, but it was just right place, right time. Got really lucky.
I mean, at that point, it was a passion, total passion project.
Purely a passion project. Yeah. I never thought about it as a business.
Still is.
Still is. I mean, still is. Yes, right.
Still is, but like.
I wait for
yeah, but like, maybe jumping ahead a little bit, but like, a lot of people have passions like art or whatnot that they don't want to make into a business, and I respect that very much, and I think that's important to keep those separate. And I feel really lucky and blessed that I was able to blend the two, that we are all able to merge the two, our passion and our business and our income and our livelihood, and still find the joy and beauty on both sides of it and the creativity. But to go back to that, so I ended up in 99 back in New York, got a bunch of stock options during the whole .com, the original .com boom. Just luck. It was luck. They also sent me all over the world. I got to travel all over. I did take a longboard to Australia and rode that all over. That was cool. To Finland, to just all over.
So that was the foundation upon which you were like, okay, I'm going to take this and use this as a springboard to develop this thing that I'm super passionate about.
Even then, not quite. I didn't connect the dots. It was like
I see.
So my dad in early 2000 called me up and he said, come back to LA. And, he had a clothing company at the time. He's like, come back.
And you had been abroad at this? Yeah,
I was in New York.
I
at
see.
This time.
Oh, okay.
And he's
New
like,
York,
come back to LA and work for me part-time, and you can start your own company out of my office. So I did that. I drove, packed all my stuff in a one-way cargo van, drove cross country in early 2000, which was a blast. Ended up back in LA, had a decent amount of money, bought a Jeep, had the foundational money to get an apartment in Venice and be able to start Loaded.
Yeah.
And my dad, officially he started working for me, but soon enough, officially I started working for him, but soon enough he ended up working for me.
Yeah.
So I started making a clothing company, a skate-inspired clothing company, because he had a clothing company. He was making cheesy Hawaiian shirts, and I'd grown up doing that, so I had the resources there, to know-how and the access to factories. So I did that for about 6 months, and then soon enough recognized that this wasn't my passion. I was not, I was interested in functionally driven design. I wasn't interested in fashion per se. I don't think I was very good at it. I don't think I am very good at it. It's not where my, as you guys know. I was very excited about functionally driven design. And it was one Friday night I was sitting down to dinner in September of 2000. I remember sitting down to dinner with my dad and being like, why don't I make skateboards? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, what do you mean, yeah? He's like, yeah, that's what you really care about. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me this before? It's like, well, you have to figure it out by yourself.
Yeah, right.
And it really was like, it was a pure epiphany at that point. It hadn't crossed my mind, but once it did, it's like you couldn't unthink it. It was like, this is what I should have been doing all along. And from there, it was a super easy 2+ years, not easy at all, of finding manufacturers, learning about materials. I went and took courses on composites, on fiberglass, I met the world's expert on woods. Just studied everything I could, and went to snowboard manufacturers and skate manufacturers around Southern California, building the initial prototypes, and was finally, fast forward to April, May of 2002, was just getting ready to launch a board. Now, look at the Vanguard back here on the wall at the wheel cutouts. Was out skating Maple again with my buddy Ariel. They didn't have those wheel cutouts at the time. And they just, they had the side cuts, which was meant to mimic a snowboard and the torsional looseness that you get.
But it was just, it wasn't wheel flares, because those weren't around at the
they
time
weren't even
either.
around.
So
that
it
was
was
10 years
just
later.
That was hard to produce.
just a big snowboard shape kind of. Yeah, okay.
Big round nose, very much snowboard inspired. And we went out skating, and Ariel got wheel bite and went down hard. And as a more proficient skater, I'd say I was more comfortable with where that wheel bite zone was.
Yeah.
And I remember coming into the office and being kind of bummed about it. And my dad, who didn't know anything about skateboarding but was an engineer by training, I told him what happened, and he's like, "Well, why don't you just do wheel cutouts?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? You can't do wheel cutout. Nobody's ever cut out a board." He's like, "So what? Why can't you do it?"
Skateboard abomination.
Yeah, it was.
Breaking
it
the
was,
rules
at least
here.
When I
Yeah,
saw these
like-
the first time, I was like, ugh.
At least in my mind, it was like, yeah. And no, not only you, but everyone.
Well,
So
everyone.
everyone. So also because at that point they were still being cut out with a jigsaw for the first 5 years. So
Eyeball.
they were we had a jig that we would use, but it was still super inconsistent. Their graphics were pretty much minimal. But we launched the first board in June of 2002.
And they
This was
weren't.
Monson.
with Monson Snowboards out of
And
Ontario.
it was not a bamboo board at that time.
No, it was oak. We used
Yes.
a vertically laminated oak core with triaxial fiberglass and epoxy top and bottom. So it was snowboard style construction applied to skate. I think we were one of the first to really do that on a broad level, and that was there was Fiberflex had been doing that on some level. There were some really creative things happening in Switzerland at the time. Fibertech and Airflow and Pumpkin were making some really cool stuff, but like cambered concave snowboard stance style, putting that all together.
With that
Oh
width,
man,
with that-
Airflow was around during that time. I forgot.
Yeah.
I remember
Chris,
Airflow.
yeah.
Yeah.
They were amazing. I mean, they were and definitely influences on what
Their
we were
board,
doing.
the Bracket, was one of their board. I had that for
don't
a brief
recall
amount of
that.
time. They had this board called the Bracket that I had for a while.
But yeah, there was, and then 2002 launched that first
think.
board. At that time, there was no online sales that I was aware of. There was, didn't cross my mind about distribution or international. It was all, something we're still focused on today is specialty high-end skate, surf, snow retailers. So I took my Jeep and I welded on like a big bracket system that fit into the hitch on the back that I was able to carry like 8 boards in back, just so in the back of the Jeep. And I would drive up and down the coast of California, literally slinging boards out the back of the
And
back
you
of the
used
truck.
to used as part of like the marketing pitch, there was like you used to drive over the board or something.
That was
It
my
like-
Jeep.
That was,
That was my Jeep.
to show how durable they were, how flexy they were.
Well,
like,
they just don't break.
I see,
They
I
wouldn't
see.
break,
They
right?
still do it. I mean, you can still ride a board, one of those oak boards from 2002. I still got one that's still fully functional.
Yeah, we
Back at
have a
home.
couple there.
Yeah.
So that was like those were the early days, essentially selling the it was called Loaded Boards back
It's called
then?
Loaded. Yeah, it was kind of a last minute trying to come up with the right name, and the boards had, because of the camber and the preloading of them, it was like a last minute idea. It was like, yeah, let's just call them Loaded. We were able to get access to the trademark on that. And Loaded has all these other connotations, which I think is very appropriate for a skate company.
Synonymous
Yeah.
with
And
yes.
what we were doing to enjoy them, and and so that's how it launched. And for the first couple of years, it still is very much about trying to share the experience of the ride. And so the way we did our marketing for the first couple of years was exclusively by giving, for the first year or so, was giving a free demo board to every shop. And as you were saying, Pablo, earlier, like these boards were very different looking than anything out there, and it would take some convincing. I'd go to shops and I'd get all like offended because be like,
Not only that, but the pricing part of it as well. It was like weird and
they
pretty-
cost
over $200.
Yeah, and they cost
no,
a
it
lot.
was still, it was
$199.
$199, yeah, at that time, with Crypto Classics and Randall 180s.
But was this so? What time did you? Was this around the same time that you got involved with the company?
No, I got involved in 2006.
2006. This was 2003.
2002.
Okay.
2002, 2003. I was living in Venice, and one of my friends in my building, she was selling boards on the boardwalk for me. And then I met these other guys, Jamie and Eric, who were also selling longboards at that point.
Oh, man.
And then Jamie ended up coming on board as our first sales guy.
Street
Sorry,
team.
Eric came on board. Jamie did our graphics at that point. And then around the same time, or a little bit later, Darren Ratcliffe literally walked through the door one day. He's like, I'm a pro snowboarder, and I get what you're doing. I saw this at a shop, and I had to come and talk to you about this. And he ended up becoming our sales rep in Colorado, really promoting the brand, and coming in-house, becoming
For
our
a
team
while,
manager, still is one
Helped
of
us
our...
develop the snowboard.
Yeah, Darren was my. That was like when I'd kind of first started riding for Loaded. Darren was the
Team manager.
his team manager at the time. So yeah,
Yeah,
There was
he's
the
still
overlap.
one of my closest friends
Same
to this
here.
day.
crazy Darren.
Living out in Hawaii, living the dream. And then the next few years were a struggle for sure. There was, trying to get people to get on the boards was challenging enough, and then building a business that was actually functional took a while. And then there was a number of key people that came and had a tremendous impact on them. Some of whom we mentioned, a number of others. Meeting Pablo was a very significant transition point for Loaded. Even
I can imagine.
it was not clear at the time. I mean, we met at a party just randomly, and Pablo started telling me about these new boards that he'd seen at a shop and how cool they were, and I thought he was kind of teasing me, but I had no idea.
I didn't know. I was in Venice trying to get a pool board because I grew up skateboarding in Mexico, no?
Sure.
So I come here, start looking for pools and stuff. I went to Morena, to Venice skateboarding stuff, to buy a pool board. But then she offered me the Hammerhead, which was a really weird looking board with inline wheels on the front. If you want to,
we need to electrify
Loaded
that.
Hammerhead, and you're going to say, what the hell is this? So she let me write that. I did some awesome carving, and then the Vanguard. And then I bought my pool board. It was an Alva, just wide ass, Alva. And then I meet Donnie, like he was saying, 2 months after that. He's in the balcony, having shots, and you want some? Like, yeah. And we just start shooting it, blah, blah, blah. I just had come back from my honeymoon, talking about, Bali and surf and blah, blah, blah. And I tell him, we started talking about skateboards.
Right.
And I tell him, dude, there's this brand that they're freaking crazy. They're nuts. It's like all flexy, weird looking, but they ride perfectly. And he's like, do you know the brand? And I'm like, I do not recall the brand, but I know it starts with an L. And he's like, is it Land Yachts? And I'm like, no, it doesn't sound like it has a Z. It's
Donnie's
just like
being polite. He's like, let
like
me
being
go through
polite.
all the other brands before I get to mine.
And I just remembered like one word, L. And he's like, Loaded? And like, yeah, dude, that one. You should see those guys are crazy.
Okay, this is a good moment.
And then he just starts cracking. I was like, and he tells me, well, we're trying to do the best boards out there. It was like, what do you mean you're trying? Like, do you work there or what? And he's like, yeah, I work there. I was like, oh man, those boards are crazy. Tell whoever invented it or the guy you work with that came up with that idea that he's fucking nuts. And then he just started laughing, but he never told me what. We just became good friends. Going out to, art exhibits, and the raves here and there, concerts, stuff. And then
we had some good ones.
I had been, prior to this, I was exporting produce, raspberries, blackberry stuff into the U.S., Japan, Europe, whatever. So I was still working a little bit on that business, but little by little, I know he needed a little bit of help for picking up boards or stuff like that. So
you're like, any way I can get involved.
I see the story a little different. He was more like that. Like, he's like, I'm getting involved. You just tell me how this is going to happen. I'm like, I don't know. Like,
I used to pick up boards.
I don't know what I'm doing myself. I'm kind of making this up as I go. And
very much.
He would pay me $1 per board that I would pick up in Ontario and drive it all the way to Ventura to Chuck Barfoot. But I had my boards on top, and sometimes I'd go with my wife to pick up the board. So I would stop in County Line or C Street, whatever, have a surf sesh, pick up the boards, come back, and I'd just get a check for how many boards. I remember 200 boards, $200.
Yeah, right.
That was a good day. That was very good at that era.
Yeah, I was all inside an Explorer, so
as many
smelling epoxy.
Yeah, and you're breathing epoxy.
But it was fun times, little by little. That was like what, for 5 months, 3 months, no?
Yeah.
And then
Well, then a couple of things. I think you started helping me out with some of the customer service stuff in-house, and then you said, this still 2006, you're like, now I'm going to go to
World Cup.
in Germany. And you're like, I can
Oh,
take a
right,
board
that's
with
when
me. And to backtrack, by that point, we'd had Martijn from Sick Boards that hit us up and was selling boards at Sick Boards. So we had a little bit of international presence, and Richard from J&R in the UK, both of whom we still work with and are still very close with to this day, had hit us up. But beyond that, like and aside from that small group in Switzerland, there really was no international longboard presence that I was
or at
aware
least
of.
community of
Yeah, I mean, those were early days, man. That was like,
So same as he was describing before. Like I would travel around the world with my board. That's what I did. So I went with my wife.
This is 2006.
Germany, 2006. She took a board. I took a board. And, we present World Cup and do the matches and stuff. But after that, I was, we were in Spain, France, and just knocking on doors. And, I had a Nextel. There wasn't even like Google Maps or anything. Yeah. So I would have to just explore at a internet coffee shop or whatever.
Go and plug into the internet.
And look into shops. I couldn't even find like distributors or stuff.
Yeah, right.
But those shops would always tell me, I buy from this distributor, go there.
Yeah, you find one, and then you'd kind of do your research through that.
And I said, again, I've done that
Pick
before.
their brains,
I
figure
had
out
done
like
that
what the deal
before
is.
with produce.
I see,
Lived in Europe for a while, so I was
just using the same techniques to
but with skateboard, which is my
which
passion,
is what you wanted to do. Anyway.
But he studied international business, but you never wanted to use it, really.
I was kind of bored using my major or whatever.
Sure.
It was cool. It was fun. But produce is another world. It's crazy. Everything is rotten in the third, fourth day. So you got to
move. It's quick.
Skateboard can last for a year or two,
or many more.
So I did that and traveled all around. And I remember I came back with a bunch of connections. A lot of people that I still work with. We still work with.
God, I think about like 2005, 2006. Like Sector 9 was kind of the big player at the time.
Yeah, they were probably already.
They just dropped their
their
Sidewinder board with like the double truck system and like with gull wing, and they were doing like kind of experimenting with a lot of like flexi kind of patterns.
They had the Cosmic
that was probably
series.
2008.
Yes.
The Cosmic series was earlier because my brother had one.
They had just done their bamboo line because I remember.
Well, that was 2006. 2006. And to get into that, because a couple things happened at that period.
Because I got the J-Bay in all bamboo, and they released it with, as we were talking about, the not vertically laminated.
Horizontal ply
of
bamboo. So for us, 2006, a couple critical things happened. We met our manufacturer, Monson at the time, that ended. And we ended up starting to work with Ernie DeLost at Capital L in San Diego. And Ernie had watched us for years working with Chuck Barfoot. And they had built Barfoot snowboards together back in the 80s.
Yes.
And Ernie had went on to run the biggest snowboard factory in the world throughout the 90s. So he had more composites expertise in this type of arena than anyone alive probably still does.
Serendipitous. It was perfect. It was
serendipitous, but it was also him like looking at us for a couple of years and making sure that we were legit and we had our act together
I see.
before bringing us on board. But once he did, that changed the game. That was like allowed us to have consistent high quality product. Continuously from then on. And the other thing that happened at that point is our manufacturer of where we sourced the wood from, we used a tan oak from Southern Oregon, and they were a big lumber company, and they're like, we don't want to work with you, you're too small for us.
Yeah, right.
So a buddy of mine, Czar, you remember Czar?
Yeah.
He was working with bamboo for interior design and industrial design stuff, and he's like, you should look at bamboo. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of
super renewable.
Fast
once
I started
renewing resource there, so it was like
we didn't know how it was going to react.
I see. It was
for a skateboard, and it turns out it was.
Those were early days.
It was a blessing.
Yeah, the bamboo was a huge blessing because for multiple reasons. One, it was environmentally, ecologically, it was just a huge step in the right direction, which was important to us. Number two, we were getting consistent product, and number three, it allowed us to start doing drop-throughs and building a cambered flexi.
Was that only because of its durability, or why did that allow?
It's because it's a grass, and because it's a grass, it's made up of like these micro tubes. So when you cut it, when you machine it, you get a perfect finish on the inside of a drop through. And if you did like a ply
with chip,
exactly,
like a whole piece of wood with
like
chip,
splinter
and this
off,
is
or
just
just
like fiber.
I see. So the cuts were super clean, allowed you to do some really cool new stuff. I see. Wow, cool.
it's a grass, and it's way more fun to ride on grass, right?
We were talking about this the other day.
And
I
then
remember
falls in line with the company.
I went to Long Beach to pick up the first bamboo
Container.
container.
Yeah,
Oh,
shipment,
wow, okay.
To like with the forwarder and signing.
sure.
Then take it to Ernie.
Yeah, we still work with
Unload
the
with
same.
Ernie. That was
Oh, so you did the actual like
what the first
Point A to
we
point B,
received
kind of
bamboo
like-
before to test.
sure.
Yeah,
But
we
when
worked
the
with
big,
like
but when the big shipment came
Containers,
to
yeah.
start, with different thicknesses and different length. For at that time, we
So
only had Vanguard, Pintail,
were they
Vanguard,
cutting them?
Pintail,
and we
fish,
were barely and fish.
and that was it when we
was
first started.
just-
we hadn't invented the.
It was just a
dervish there.
stacks of raw material at that point, though,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, just like floor, almost like flooring.
Just
Bamboo
big
flooring.
sheets of bamboo.
That is
Bamboo,
correct.
and then we
Wow.
would get them. So we originally tested 4 or 5 different manufacturers. We found the one who supplied the material the most consistently, the most specific. Like the thickness on the bamboo makes a huge impact on this. On
That's
the stiffness.
also when you were going out there to like actually see the forests.
So I
and
went out
stuff. I mean,
to China in 2010.
okay, so later.
Yeah, we were already working with bamboo.
I see. Yeah.
In 2006, we did the Vanguard in bamboo. In 2007, we moved our entire lineup to bamboo.
Ah, okay.
And then we launched the Dervish. And the Dervish is really what put us on the map. That was the board that just really allowed us that people were able to be like, oh, I get what you're doing. And really, because of lower center of gravity.
the
and-
original dervish without the
Yeah, no
kicktails, the
kicktails,
one that
just-
was like, yeah,
Right.
okay, yeah,
with it had the ancient Persian art
Yes.
influence, the blue and gold graphic.
Yeah, right,
I love
right.
that was one of my
and
favorites.
then the Adam had gotten involved at that
And
point.
Adam Colton, yeah, about a year earlier, but around that same era, and he had a huge impact on showcasing that to the world.
Yeah.
YouTube happened YouTube started in 2006, I believe, or
Right.
at least that's when we started. So that's what helped us, broadcast our insanity to the rest of the world.
Yeah, and the Adam videos dropped, and I remember seeing those videos with him on the dervish. On
What was it, whirling dervish?
yes,
Is that
maybe.
the first one, or is that the?
it was him
Yeah,
and
Whirling
Stokowski in the
Whirling
woods, and they just kind of launched the board, and then he jumps on it. But that was before orangutan wheels too, because I remember that video they had ABEC 11s,
Yeah,
but I think
probably
you guys
gumballs.
were testing because Stokowski had a set of blank, like just unmarked wheels in that video that people noticed, and I think those are was that the first set of Otang wheels? Were you guys developing them at
It
that
could have been
time?
the loaded wheel. that
It was the
before
loaded-
naming.
If it's 2007,
coming up
it
with
might
the
have been
orangutan.
the first orangutan ones.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. I just remember there was a set like
but it was right at that era.
there was like a very distinct set of ABEC 11 green wheels that like Adam was on, and then Sikowski was on something that was just unmarked, and everybody was always kind of like, "What is that?" And there's always been like the rumor, at least within our circles, that was like the first set of Otang wheels. So I just
Could have been.
I guess it's just me curious, like wondering if that was the first.
2007
Probably gonna
probably
watch it
was.
right after
We should watch it. Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
It probably was.
Okay.
That is the right.
I was always wondering, like, oh man, I should ask that question and finally kind of put that one to rest.
The Dervish is what I mean. All those things coming together, and then the launch of the Dervish is really, and then the launch of Orangutan a year later, is what allowed us to like have a functional company to be able to do this in a way that's
Dervish was the board that really kind of
Hands down.
Yeah.
drop kicked the company basically into the air. Like, I mean, you guys had the Vanguard. The Vanguard was great, and like people were kind of into it, but I remember the Dervish was the one that would show up in everybody's college dorm.
right.
Like that was like college campuses. You see people cruising to class on the bright orange wheels.
I mean, that was a real wheel cut.
Yes.
Like now it was shameless. Now we're really good
But
to
it was
a wheel cut. Doesn't
also
matter.
seeing a drop through for the first time that for me was like seeing a board that was so weird that the trucks were mounted, to the top of the board. And the board almost hung beneath the truck, so to speak.
We didn't invent the drop through. There had been others who'd done it before for downhill boards.
Sure, and I think Sector 9 had a drop through themselves that they had done.
Maybe, yeah, I don't recall. I remember there was.
But it was
like
the first flexi one.
Definitely the first flexi one.
With camber and concave.
And then
that was the challenge.
And then figuring out how to get it to flex, right? We would get cracking on it, and then we have that what we call the keyhole, that line that comes down through it.
Yeah.
That was cracking on every board. So we had to do a little, just a little turn with just.
One thing about
change the whole
that
thing.
story that I thought was really interesting is like, once we started seeing cracking, my initial thought was like, let's add as much material as possible,
So it doesn't crack.
and so it bring it in,
So
and then
you added more fiberglass,
we added more. Yeah, we'd cut it in
more
as
meat,
tight as
more
possible.
bamboo, more-
I see.
And then Ernie said, no, I think we actually need to do the opposite and create like a keyhole that like a line down that allows it to flex, and that will absorb that
And-
flex.
It's like
and
torsionally.
Torsionally.
Pass me that if you can. Just so people know what we're talking about.
right, of
This keyhole. This
one.
The cut used to be there. Now we came up with.
Oh,
that
so it ended.
keyhole.
It ended
So
early.
less material, and that makes this
I see.
twist.
Torsionally,
And then the cracks disappeared. The crack was always here.
The cracks were
up
showing up here on people's
This was
boards.
full of.
Like they would.
This was full of bamboo. This was bamboo.
I see.
And here it would end here, and that was where the crack would develop.
Okay.
And as Donnie was saying, he wanted to put more bamboo, like do the cut even higher.
Yeah, we
up
tried
here,
that, and it just kept breaking.
breaking more.
Yeah,
And now with this keyhole, problem solved.
Change.
yeah, just kind of. It was eye opening for me because it was very much
Well,
a
I mean,
lesson.
The learning process.
Less is more.
That's why we were working with Ernie. He had all this
Knowledge and
Expertise.
experience.
knowledge,
and
expertise from
experience.
back in the 80s. He's a snowboard pioneer with Chuck Barfoot and those guys. So
Yeah.
We've
Even
been
before, yeah.
blessed and honored to work with those guys, and we've had an awesome run.
Yeah.
Continue to have an awesome run.
So then, after basically the success of the Dervish, everything from there allowed you to go ahead and create orangutan wheels. And how
Orangutan.
did orangutan wheels kind of come into creation?
I think we're going to save orangutan for another
Okay, okay.
podcast because it's its own story.
Fair enough,
On its
fair
own,
enough, yes.
and an important one. Back to what Paul was talking about in terms of the wheel flares, and back to what happened with my dad, the wheel cutouts. Sorry.
Oh yes, yeah.
When it's kind of a similar story. Is that before launching in 2002, I took the board to Josh's backyard with a jigsaw, with a sawzall I think I was using actually at that point for some reason, and started cutting in like very linear, very minimalist squares. Yeah, in order what's the minimum I need to do to allow for there not to be wheel bite. Mm-hmm. And I'd do that on one side, and then on the other side of the board I would do like a more organic shape. And one on the nose, one on the the tail.
Curvy, flowy, yeah.
And then started to realize how the organic shapes would actually impact the flex characteristics. And like you mentioned, the hammerhead, like I'm actually very proud of that board because trying to get a board where you had a consistent flex despite having this wild and bizarre, nose shape that was required by those trucks, and getting that to flex consistently took a lot of ingenuity and creativity. And then at that point we were also using, I was using Corel Draw and Adobe Illustrator, doing this almost by
Paintbrush.
hand.
I mean, I'm curious to know,
pretty close.
the hammerhead in and of itself was such an oddity. Where does that fit into the whole timeline? Where did that come?
That was 2003, and that was
Where-
in that era. There was a lot of oddities at play.
Sure.
There was a lot of strange things.
There was some snowboards that had that it was like a U-shaped underneath that had the rollers underneath the snowboard. That was like a snowboard trainer or
That was
something.
the Flow Lab was the company. They had actually, I believe it was some designers from Honda were designing that as a potential idea for a snowmobile. And then they spun it off as a skate concept. And they had these two guys, Mike and Kevin, who I still am in touch with every once in a while, took over that brand. Mm-hmm. And we were friends with them. And we're like, hey, let's, part of our ethos has always been, let's collaborate. You're doing something interesting and unique. Let's see how we can design something around it.
Yeah.
And what can we create? And so that was one thing. There was a bunch of others.
So the hammerhead came out of the collaboration. That was a collaboration piece.
Yeah.
Wow. So the collaboration kind of aspect of the company goes way back.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I thought this was like a newer.
Were we going to do something with the original?
We actually did
At one
design
point?
the pintail was originally designed for around the original spring truck.
Oh, wow.
That didn't work out for a whole bunch of reasons, but we
Sure.
ended up launching that board on its own around the Randall 150s. That was that launched in 2004, and I was surfing very intensively at that period, and we were also like Vanguard, Hammerhead, and Fish were not successful. And until 2007, it was, the whole company was touch and go, whether it was going to be successful.
We didn't know how to do tails with the fish. So we had to add a foam.
Yeah, I
tail.
remember the
Foam
fish
next
had
up.
that like foam
Piece of
block.
the-
Yeah, because we couldn't get
We
the
didn't know how to-
curvature.
I see.
They were all
Yeah.
cracking or when we needed to, but
Yeah, I mean,
But there was-
access to CNC machines.
There
and
was two
tooling.
versions of the fish, right? Didn't
Well,
you
the
guys
fish
do-
became the ceviche,
ceviche,
which
and then
became,
the pokey.
and then the pokey.
Okay. It was the ceviche that I'm thinking about. Okay.
When they had the recipe.
Yes,
on top.
right.
That was my mother-in-law's ceviche recipe.
I
like,
was
let's just put
wondering
them
where
in-
that came from.
Yeah.
We always joked about that.
Diana's
Like,
mom.
there's a,
Yeah.
there's a
Had the
recipe on the
recipe,
bottom
yeah.
there where it's like, I wonder where they got that. That's funny.
That's funny.
Oh, wow,
Maybe we
okay.
could talk about the
People
graph.
were making it. Didn't we do like a competition, like cook your own ceviche?
Yeah,
like,
with
we did, like,
Fabricio
something.
and Dati.
People were doing their own. It was
Oh,
cool.
that's good. That's good.
Speaking of Diana, who does our graphic design so wonderfully and appreciated for many, many years. Before before she came on board to do that, the first year the graphics were intentionally very, very subtle. There was just a loaded logo or pre-current loaded logo, and the reason for that was like, let it not be graphic driven, let it be functionally driven,
Yeah.
let people realize what
Just
this
tech.
board is. Just technical, it's just experience.
Performance.
And then when we met Darren, we met his buddy Travis Parr, who was and continues to be an amazing artist. And Travis did a whole beautiful painting that ended up being which was this painting,
graphic,
but we didn't
yes.
have that the technology to actually print this on the board at that time.
Did you guys do it in a two-color? Because remember you
We
were
did it in
saying...
two-color.
because
black
we could
and
only
white.
do silkscreen.
At that point, we could only do silkscreen.
I see.
We were printing directly on the board.
So the graphic that's on the current Vanguard is that
On this
No. On
This
the
is
current
digit.
Vanguard, we did a graphic contest. We did a couple graphic contests, and the
I
current one I
see.
think is actually
A
residual.
Brazilian dude won the one with the flying fish.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
that's what I was wondering if
Yeah.
that was...
But this is now we actually went back to the original painting, and we're able to finally digitally print it directly on a bamboo veneer.
cool.
So we're doing this
It
as
looks
a
so
limited
good.
run,
Well printed.
well printed,
So good. And are these all... They're all numbered? You have them numbered?
hand
It's-
numbered. We're going to do 250 of them.
Wow.
Do we're launching them November 30th.
Okay.
And it's a one-time thing. A percentage of this will go to charity. And
are these a specific flex?
they're all Flex
No,
3s.
Flex 3.
Okay.
They're all Flex 3s, which I'll give a shout out to Boosted. They took our Flex 3 and that's what they used for their boards.
Okay.
And that breathed a lot of life into, that was, the mid 2014, 15, 16 era. Breathed a lot more life back into the Vanguard, which isn't one of our, it still is in our lineup 20
So the
years later.
boosted board is a Vanguard.
Is a Vanguard
It's a
Flex 3.
modified Vanguard that's specifically designed to incorporate the boosted system.
Yes,
Yeah,
for the V1 and V2 boosted. For the V1s, they used an off-the-shelf Vanguard with a different graphic, and for the V2s, they developed and we worked with them on a channel that ran through, so the wires can run through the center of the board.
Right.
But the Vanguard, it's been in our lineup for 21 years, but we've moved in very, very different directions. Now that we have the technology to develop and design boards, in-house in a matter of days, we're now exploring all kinds of new, unique things.
But the soul of the Vanguard is essentially in most of the other carving platforms you have.
Very much, very much.
The Icarus is kind of somewhat a amalgam of a little bit of Vanguard, a little bit of dervish.
I'd say the Icarus is almost the swan song. Is almost the epics of like what we were able to achieve with carving, with a functional performance performance carving board, but also using what we learned from some of the downhill and free ride boards, the wheel flares, the complex contouring that we learned in the early 2010, 11, 12.
And then going on that same like electric board vein, the motherboard. I know that was a board. Was that designed as kind of like an evolution of the Vanguard going into an EV domain?
Yeah, that was
it the offshoot of that like bloodline?
Yeah, I mean it is. Yeah, good question. That was built off of the Icarus tooling, but it was very much like where we felt we can take a carving pumping board into the electric world, and with the way we launched that board, we launched a limited edition of those as well,
right?
And just did those specifically and intentionally for the e-skate, DIY community.
I see. Okay.
To be able to use that to build a platform, we learned a lot. We'd made some mistakes in terms of how we did it. We did like I think a beautiful pattern on the bottom, but the problem with that pattern is it made it difficult to have a housing attached to it. So that was some of the feedback we got.
The housing to
sit
flush.
Mount flush.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's always something.
But there was a lot of learnings. I still have a motherboard with an electric system at home that I use.
Cool.
That board is
unlimited?
A lot of fun with an unlimited system.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was just like interested to see how the Vanguard's lineage has essentially kind of found its way into every other board in the lineup. But from the downhill, like all the knowledge essentially from the Vanguard is in everything else. So it's just interesting to see how you guys have taken that and spun it off to fit the different markets, so to speak, EV market or what carving kind of discipline, pumping or dancing. What have you. It's the continued evolution experiment of Vanguard. So it's
maybe
cool.
Maybe we can use this as a transition to kind of discuss some of where we see the future going.
Sure. Yeah.
From our perspective, at least, I think skateboarding, there's so much. I think we've still just barely scratched the surface on what can be done on a skateboard. And some of the places that I see that are really important is continuing with our heritage stuff, with carving, with dancing, with freestyle, with free ride.
Right.
Exploring more in terms of transportation and the way we move through our planet, I think is an important part of it.
The Fathom.
The Fathom being a case in point. But also continue, one of the reasons we've never done a street skate is the reason we've never done a street skate is because our role is to explore new directions in skateboarding, to try to create new things that haven't been done, not different for the sake of different, but different because they're important.
It's like reminiscing back, I think like the closest you guys brushed with like street skate was like Kanthaka, and then maybe the overland shape.
Yeah, just a longer board pool, but also more transportation oriented.
Yes, right. There was always that in there.
Like Donnie was saying, street skateboards are already been made and corrected, and people are doing awesome stuff.
Unless we have something to contribute, let other people do that and let them do it well.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think some of the things that are really exciting going forward, and I'd love to also hear the audience's perspective, and I'd love to hear feedback on where other people see this going. But some of the places that we see this going, one place that's really interesting right now is the downhill community. We saw, 2000, you were part of this, 2013, 14, 15, there was a huge upsurge in downhill with races all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
And then some of that kind of fell apart. And it seems like it's coming back together. It's kind of working through some kinks, but I'm excited because I see a lot of guys. We've been talking a lot with Max Caps recently. He's been helping us with developing a new downhill wheel. We've been working with Dusty in-house on a new downhill deck. I suspect that a lot of that, it's the old new leadership or those same people.
It's interesting, like the different, not to interrupt you, just with the different like veins of skateboarding have their own kind of rhythms as to how they kind of go in and out of, the spotlight, so to speak.
Agreed.
And I think every time they kind of step in the shadows and then come back, there's always a new, refreshed, either a new generation or a new group of people that are kind of discovering it and finding out how it applies to them. And with that comes a whole new kind of set of innovation and ideas and, people bringing new things to it.
The old and the new, because I think what's exciting about this period as an outsider from the more downhill specific space is that I see that a lot of the people who were young and immature when it first happened are now mature and are now bringing great ideas and a lot more thoughtfulness into it. And I know it's still struggling, but I believe and I think very highly or very strongly that this is something that we're going to see continue to grow.
Well, I think, there's also so much knowledge that we've built up in regards to like wheel technology and, the evolution of how
the urethane,
the urethane compound behaves under heat, under, duress, under all kinds of factors. When there was just those cryptos around that you guys are riding on, it was early beginnings, so definitely so much knowledge, so much like, I mean, I think about where we've come from like just the four president in and of itself to like now. I mean, how that urethane compound has changed and evolved.
And it continues to evolve. We're testing every day.
Yeah.
We're lucky to have our vendors or vendors that they allow us to be testing day to day. Before at the beginning it was like, oh man, really? You're going to want something different? This already works. Take it.
Yes.
It's like, no, it doesn't also, really for what we need. Right. And then they got into it as well and we just go at it.
And also the technology today is very different. The ability to build the Vanguard tooling took like a year and a half to getting access to a CNC machine. And now we have one in-house that we can crank one out in 20 minutes, from design through cutout,
Because before you had to like send the plans off to Ernie.
Even before.
Wait for him to cut it out and then come back and then test it.
Yeah.
And then,
maybe this it would work.
And then maybe this needs to be changed a little bit.
Now we know if this doesn't work or yes, this could work.
I mean, taking this Simtail, for instance, a board that is forthcoming.
Yes, it is. And hopefully in March.
I just think about how many renditions of
iterations.
that,
we went through a lot.
So
little details.
And this is a board that was kind of already made, if you want.
Yes, there's already a foundation to it,
but still, behaviors are.
There's already
wacky.
a design.
When you think it's already, we got this, it starts behaving.
But I think about
very weirdly
how quickly we were able to do that process as compared to the past. I mean, even when I was prototyping that with you guys, it was enlightening to me as to how fast we worked through that. Because each week we could come up with a new, go take this. You've got this cut out. Go test this for a week. Come back. Let us know what you think. Okay, this needs to change. Let's tweak this. Okay, next week.
And a little bit of placebo in that. Like we wouldn't tell you what fiberglass we use for this or that.
Yeah, blind.
How thick.
Blind testing.
Blind testing and then. To
take it back a level, like big picture, we started off talking about the early 2000s and the growth of longboarding and how those were driven by things like the Randalls, the Crypto Classics, the flexible boards. But the real heritage of longboarding came from the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, right.
And then kind of disappeared for a while. And the reason it came back is because this new technology came and allowed us to continue to all these brands, us and Lanyards and
new life
Rain and Sector and Arbor and all these people to develop and create new stuff. Yeah. And I think we're going to continue to see that. I mean, I don't think that once again, we haven't scratched the surface on what a skateboard can be. Mm-hmm. I think as we start exploring bigger wheels and smaller wheels and faster wheels and different types of trucks. And
that's exciting. That's very exciting because it's like, oh man, how much further can we push this? You know?
I mean, speaking of pushing, one thing that I think is going to grow is going to be some sort of hybrid version of LDP and long distance stuff.
I want to see motorized bearings. I want to see a bearing that is power source is self-contained.
Limited was close to that in a way. Right?
Yeah.
Yes, right.
And I'm sure it'll happen at some point, right? I mean, motors and batteries are only going to get smaller.
Nano motors, yeah.
Right.
Flywheels.
It's just exciting to think about the innovation. It's how do I phrase this? Like, it's not like putting the cart in front of the horse, but it's interesting that like how one begets the other. You have the riders who push the boards, or the athletes who go out there and they push the boards and the technology to the extent of what it's capable of. And then you have, as you're saying, this new technology that comes around that then allows them to innovate on stuff that's already existing, which allows the rider to then push even harder and do even more outrageous stuff. And it's so interesting. And for me being in this over, from 2009, I mean, seriously, from 2009 till, present, but watching this kind of evolve over the course of all these years and watch the technology kind of take one step forward and then the human aspect of it take another step forward. It's fascinating, truly fascinating. And I think Loaded specifically has kind of, you guys have positioned yourselves in a way that's like, it's always technology driven. It's always innovation, driven by innovation. So it's, I guess it's exciting to see. It's fun to see the growth of this industry.
And as you say, it's not innovation in a vacuum. It's the people. It's the people in house first and foremost. Thankfully, we're surrounded by a ton of amazing people and a ton of amazing skaters. And having that feedback with the community, and the way that the community has been growing over the past few years is mind blowing, and the impact, the input that we're getting. And that's why, once again, would love to get, if you can put it in the comments section or whatever, or send any of us an email or a text or whatnot. Would love to hear other people's ideas for where this should go. We don't have a monopoly on great ideas, and we feel like there's a lot more we need to give. There's a lot more that we can do. And I'm personally super excited for where the future is going to go.
Same here, man.
Lots of exciting stuff on the horizon. What do you think, guys? You want to tie this episode off?
Yeah, I think this has been great.
All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, so much for listening to our 21 years of Loaded Boards podcast, a series where we discuss the intricacies of this wonderful brand and the heritage and the ethos. And yes, I think that'll just about do it for us. We will see you in the next installment. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Donnie and Pablo.
Thank you, man.
For sharing your wisdom. And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Thank you guys for watching.
Cheers.